I thought I would start with a couple of winter photographs. I work at the Creation Museum in northern Kentucky. It's near the city of Cincinnati. And we've got a very large building here, as you can see, where the museum is located. The museum is very big. It takes really 2 days to see it. So if you're coming to the United States, it's a must-see stop for all of you, I think. And it's winter here, it's summer back home, but 6 months ago it was winter, and so on a day back in January, at the height of winter, I did something a little unusual. You see the lake we have there? You can see that I'm walking on water. The ice was about that thick. It had been very cold, colder than it usually gets where I live. And also, I like to go barefoot. You haven't seen that much here, so anyway, I decided to go out on the pond and get a photograph of me standing on the ice, but also doing it barefoot. I wasn't there too long, by the way. It was a little cold, as you might imagine, but hopefully, when you come, it won't be frozen over. It'll be a little warmer time of year. Just remember, if you come there in our summer, it's your winter here, so you might want to get away from the winter chill. I'm sure our temperatures in the summer won't be nearly as hot as yours are. Anyway, I'm asked to do Genesis 10 and 11 today. It contains actually three things. First of all, chapter 10 contains what we call the Table of Nations, giving some of the genealogies and some of the nations that sprung up after the flood. The Tower of Babel, the first part of chapter 11, where we see different languages and different ethnic groups coming about. And then finally, the second half of chapter 11 is the lineage of Abraham, which is very important. And chapter 10, remember that Noah comes off the ark, but he has his three sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth, with him. And they have their wives. And shortly thereafter, we have the birth of Arphaxad just 2 years after the flood. So they start procreating and having children pretty quickly after that. And in this table of nations, they give you the lineages of each of the three sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth. They talk about each one of them having their sons, what their names are, and then some of their sons, some of their grandsons, and who their names are, and so forth. And out of this, we can trace some of the nations from the information given there. Some of these nations are pretty definite, and I'll share a couple of them with you here in just a moment. Others are not so definite, and some of them are downright difficult to try to decipher. And I think people have attempted to do this with perhaps a little more enthusiasm than is warranted here, because I don't think we can trace all the nations. In fact, there are a lot of nations we really can't trace. And I think some of the tracings people do are just a little bit, again, a little bit imaginative. Unfortunately, they rely upon some written accounts that supposedly are ancient about who the ancestors of, say, various European nations are, but a lot of those resources really are late medieval. They go back less than 1,000 years. So some people would argue, well, those sources were written compiling much earlier records and manuscripts we no longer have. Well, that may be so, but we don't have record of that. So I'm very skeptical of some of these claims, and so I want to be very careful about those. But we can make several broad conclusions. The one son, Japheth, generally his descendants went west and northward after the flood, starting with the flood and the ark landing in somewhere in the Middle East, probably north of Mesopotamia somewhere. And then the descendants of Ham generally went west and to the south. A lot of them, we think, probably ended up in the continent of Africa. And I presume that many of you are descendants of various children or grandchildren of Ham. That's the general assumption people make. Shem, generally his sons, his descendants went a bit eastward of the Middle East, and a lot of them stayed put right there in the Middle East. And there are many exceptions to this. There's some mixing and blending that took place, and just trying to get a straight lineage out of all this is more difficult than it might seem, and people have tried to do this, but again, I'm a bit skeptical. There are two groups, however, we can clearly trace. One of them are the Canaanites. Canaan was one of the sons of Ham, and in Genesis 10, 15 to 19, it gives some of his lineage. And it even explicitly describes where they end up. It's basically over near the promised land of Abraham's descendants. and regions a bit north and south of that region. In fact, it was frequently early called, the book of Genesis, called the land of Canaan, because and it was peopled by the Canaanites, who were descendants of Canaan. And it turns out the Canaanites were some pretty wicked people. They worshipped some pretty evil gods, and they practiced child sacrifice, things like this, things that I find unbelievable. I don't know how people could do that. And they also, some of the ones, Sodom and Gomorrah and other cities in the plain, they were Canaanites as well, and they were known for their wickedness, their perversion. In fact, the word sodomy comes today, still used after thousands of years, to describe the wickedness of these people. So the Canaanites, for some reason, were, I guess because it was the land they originally possessed, it was what God eventually gave to Abraham, he saw fit to explicitly describe where they were. And Abraham's lineage is also described in chapter 11, verses 10 through 28, and where he ended up, and his father was in Ur of the Chaldees, which is over near the Persian Gulf in modern-day Iraq. We think we know where Ur was. And back at the time of Abraham, it probably was a seaport, but because of silting up, now it's actually inland some distance. A lot of silt was deposited and left Ur high and dry upstream and inland some distance. And again, as I've said, many people have attempted to trace various nations, and they do this sometimes by looking at reading different accounts, as I mentioned, supposedly giving the lineage of different peoples. I'm skeptical of how accurate, how historic those are. Furthermore, they sometimes will look at similarities in names that they find there and try to match them up. And that's kind of a dangerous thing to do because of different languages and such, and it's not getting an exact match very well. So I think a lot of this stuff is speculative. It may be true. I doubt if all of it's true. And it also leaves out vast groups of people. For instance, people from the Far East, Chinese of various types, Koreans, Mongolians, Southeast Asians. These people are pretty much left out of the discussion, and they had to come from somewhere. And I've heard various speculations about where they come. I think when I was growing up, a lot of people said they were descendants of Shem. Now I hear people saying they're descendants of Japheth. They both can't be right, I wouldn't think, unless there's a lot of blending going on. So I think it's there's a lot more work that could be done if it's possible. But anyway, here's a typical map you might find. There are plenty of maps out there, and they give 3 different codes here for Shem and for Ham and for Japheth. Shem, his descendants would be red, Ham would be purple, and Japheth would be green. As you can see up here, some of the Japheth up here to the north, up this region of the Middle East, and getting up the Caucasus, and then maybe spilling over to Europe. That's where it really gets kind of dicey trying to figure that out. They generally would, most people try to say that people from Europe or European descent, such as I am, come from Japheth, but it's not clear that that's true. You find various Hamites. Some of those are ending up here in Turkey, and some of them here in this general region, but others going on down to Egypt and across northern Africa and down the east coast of Africa, and from there nobody knows for sure. Some people here are saying that the people in the Far East might even be descendants of Ham. Nimrod definitely is a descendant of Ham, as we'll see here in a little bit. And then the Shemites, the descendants of Shem, a lot of those are staying here, some moving on down into the Middle East and even over to Africa, some moving northward, some of them moving farther east. Yet the ark showing up here north of Mesopotamia, that's probably good. There's a mountain way up here in Turkey that bears the name Ararat that many people think is the site of where the ark landed. But as it turns out, that name has been called Ararat about 1,000 years, maybe a little longer than that. It's very likely that Ararat is a bit farther south in some of the mountains of eastern Turkey or even northern Iraq. We don't know exactly where the ark landed. There's a lot of discussion and even a lot of arguments. Boy, there are arguments, aren't there, about between various people about where the ark was. And all I know for sure is that they all can't be right because they're all disagreeing with one another. So I would suggest that when you look at these maps and discussions, and a whole book's been written on this, that you keep a kind of a watchful eye. I mean, just be very careful because I'm very skeptical of how correct a lot of these are. Genesis 9:1, it's the aftermath of the flood, and God gave a command to Noah and his descendants. He said, be fruitful and multiply. That was the same sort of instruction given to Adam and Eve, and they apparently did a pretty good job of doing that in the pre-flood world, because there may have been millions or even billions of people at that time. We can estimate they had 16 centuries, and people were having an awful lot of children. And he also told them to fill the earth, and that's kind of a repetition of the admonition that was given to Adam and Eve and their descendants. They were to be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. Now, it was a little more difficult this time around, because the earth, we think, the beginning of creation was a single large continent. It would have been fairly easy to fill that one, but once you disperse the continents, as we think happened during and shortly after the flood, you have barriers. You can cross over from Asia into Africa fairly easy. There on the Sinai, you can do it by walking, or you could build small boats and go across those bodies of water between here and Asia. You can do a similar thing with Asia. You can head east into Asia, you can head north and then westward and end up into Europe. You can make a jump across water if you want to. But populating a place like Australia is difficult. We think that during an ice age after the flood, water levels were lowered, allowed animals and people to transport across the land bridges. Also, we think a similar thing happened with North America and Asia. They were connected at one time and allowed people to walk from western or eastern Asia, or Siberia, over into North America and on down into South America. It would have been more difficult because the land spread out and stretched out more. But again, God had given that command, and there was plenty of room and plenty of resources to do that. However, what was their response? Well, it was just the opposite. It says there they use the same language. No problem with that. It makes sense that they would have used the same language. But it says they journeyed eastward to Shinar and settled there. Now, Shinar is a plain in northern Mesopotamia. We believe that's where it is, northern Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, probably. And this would be eastward, both probably from where the ark landed in the mountains of Ararat, as well as eastward from where most of the activity recorded in the Bible was. So that description is very good. However, they failed to disperse. They did not disperse. And in fact, they had a defiant response to God in this, why they would not disperse. It says there explicitly in Genesis 11 that they built brick and they fired it. They put it in kilns or something and treated it. You know, if you make brick out of mud, if it rains much, the stuff just kind of melts away, doesn't it? But if you take that same clay, it's quality clay, and you fire it, you transform it, you make it into a very hard substance. That's what bricks are made out of. It's fired clay, and it's very tough, very durable. It doesn't wash away like mud does. It does kind of scale off and eventually break apart, but it's a very durable substance. And it says they use tar for mortar. Today we use something made out of stone, lime, and several things go together to make them stick together, but I guess tar would work. And there they decided, the plain of Shinar, to build a city and build a tower. And what was the purpose of that tower? Well, it says there are three things. First of all, they wanted to make a name for themselves. They wanted to make a name for themselves. Now, it's one thing to kind of make a name for yourself today in the world. You want to be famous, you want to tell people who you are, and you want people to know who you are. But they all kind of knew each other, didn't they? They were all living together. How can you make a name for yourself when there's only one group of people? It'd be like, Zambia. We want everybody in the world to know about Zambia. But what if everybody in the world were Zambians? It would make no sense, does it? So there's something a little more beyond that, I think, quite a bit more beyond that. They were trying to make themselves important. Possibly meaning more important than God. We don't need God. Who are you going to make your name for in front of? Yourselves? That doesn't make any sense. So that thing, making a name for themselves, they were very proud, arrogant people, and it tells me that they were defiantly telling God, we don't have to listen to you because we're powerful. First of all, they said that they're doing this so we won't be scattered. They explicitly say there, so we won't be scattered around the world. And they built this big tower, and if they built the tower big enough, you can see it from everywhere. You can see it from everywhere, and if you travel off some distance, you can always tell where home is. It's a plain, it's flat, you can look up, oh yeah, there's home, and you can head back. It kind of makes a center, a capital, as it were, and it kind of makes a monument for themselves. Why do civilizations, why do cities, why do nations and states, why do they build big monuments? Well, they want to attract attention, they want to commemorate something, they want to do all sorts of stuff. And people build tall buildings like the World Trade Centers, or Empire State Building, or they build other structures, Eiffel Tower in Paris, and it's quite a landmark. Everybody's ever heard of the Eiffel Tower. They know it's in Paris. They know it's big. And most people would recognize a picture of it, even though they may have never seen the Eiffel Tower. I never have. But I can easily recognize a photograph of the Eiffel Tower. So this was a monument recognizing themselves, who we are. So as you can see, they are defiant. They're shaking their fist at God, and they're saying, no, we will not disperse, because if we disperse, we will not be as powerful as we are now. But if we hang together, we will be very powerful. Well, how did God respond? First of all, where was this? I'll talk about this. Well, Shinar, as I said, is in northern Mesopotamia, as near as we can tell. And they built this city. It's going to be called Babel here in a little bit. They built the tower. I guess the city was called Babel. The tower is called Babel. And many people think that the location of the Tower of Babel was the city of Babylon. The similarity of the name suggests that afterwards people were picking up the pieces and trying to rebuild. And they said, well, this is where Babel was, so we're going to stay here, even though nobody else is, we will. And we'll carry on this name. And so with translations and transliterations, changes of languages and so forth, Babel became Babylon. Well, again, that's the consensus. I don't know if it's true or not, but it makes sense to me, and I'll go with that. It could be somewhere else nearby, but that seems reasonable to me. Now, identity of the people, this leapt out at me a few years ago, I think, and again, this is conjecture on my part, don't take it as truth, but I think the people we would identify as the people who built the tower were the Sumerians. Why do I say that? Well, number one, the Sumerian culture is the earliest civilization we know anything about. We know their language, we can read it, we know something about their literature, we know something about their religion. People claim there were earlier civilizations than that, but we don't know much about any of those things. But the Sumerians left records, they left structures, we can identify their buildings and so forth, and we know their language. And a few years ago, I stumbled on this, and it just leapt out at me. It turns out their language, the Sumerian language, is an isolated language. That means it's not related to any other language. Now, I'm most familiar with Indo-European languages. Those languages are spoken anywhere from India all the way over to Europe. Linguists see similarities between those. English is classified as a Germanic language because it rose from German of 1,000 years, 1,500 years ago. It was German language. And I understand that it's easiest for an English-speaking person as a native language to learn German or to learn Dutch or some other related Germanic language because of similarity in grammar and spelling and words and so forth. There are also Romance languages such as French and Italian and Spanish and so forth that derived from ancient Latin. And then there are Slavic languages. We get Russian and Polish and things like this. And they look back and they can see some similarities between all of these and some Indian languages, and then there are little groups here and there. So linguists have gone to a lot of trouble looking for similarities of structures of the different languages, and they group them together. In African languages, they can group together and put those into different groups with their similarities and differences with one another. So far for Eastern languages of natives in South America and North America and so forth. While they can group most languages with other languages being similar, Sumerian defies that. It's isolated, it doesn't have any related languages. So when I learned that, I thought, well, maybe that was the original language. And the reason why there's nothing related to it is because God changed the languages of everybody and nobody spoke Sumerian anymore. That's what happened to Sumerian culture, I would think, at that point. But anyway, that's again what I think. I can't prove that, and that's a good idea, I think, but I could be wrong. So just make sure you keep that filed away under conjectures. Now, what's interesting is that around the Middle East, you have these things called ziggurats. They're kind of stepped towers like this. They're kind of steep-sided. Sometimes they're real steep. And these were common among the ancient Middle Eastern cultures, and many people think that ziggurats may be memorials of the Tower of Babel. And when people were dispersed, they carried this memory with them. And we still carry it today, many people do. And so whenever they went, they decided, well, we're going to kind of reproduce what we had at one time. And so they build these things. And after a while, people just get into building ziggurats, and they never really think about why they're doing it. They're just doing it because that's what we do. And so there are ziggurats examples from everywhere. Here's one, an old one from the Middle East. Notice that it's kind of worn down. It looks like a big hill with some steep sides. It's made out of some sort of brick or stone. And with time, those things, due to the elements, the weather, they wear down. And these people have excavated these, and they've tried to figure out what they might have looked like when they were still pristine and in one sort of piece. Well, notice that it's kind of got a square base, and the sides kind of go up like this. It's not going straight up, it's kind of going up stepwise like that. What does it look like? Anybody? Doesn't it look a lot like a pyramid? Yeah, in Egypt you've got the great pyramids of Giza, not too far from Cairo. And there's an aerial shot of these things. Those are impressive structures. And by the way, they were built very early on. It's an amazing thing. It's a whole talk one could do about this. But you know, some of the most impressive structures around the world were built in the earliest time periods. They've had like 25, 28 dynasties, 30 dynasties in Egypt over the years. These date from the very earliest dynasties. And they look a lot like ziggurats to me. I don't know if that's exactly what they are, but I think there's a relationship there. And as time goes by in Egypt, they continue to make pyramids, but guess what? They kept getting smaller, and they kept making them out of inferior products, so they don't hold up as well. So as time goes by, the pyramids in Egypt get worse and worse. The very best ones early on. Now, why is that? Usually the evolutionists would have you believe that people evolved, and as they did, societies evolved, and things got better, and you would expect the best things to have developed at the latest periods. But they didn't. They actually, in ancient times, they developed early on, just full-blown, and then pale imitations after that. Now, what's confused us is in the last 500 years, we've had an explosion of technology. And that technology has caused our civilizations today to really take off and do some marvelous things. I mean, airline travel, flying to the moon and other planets, it's amazing. No other civilization in the past was able to do that. And so the people did see the last few hundred years, and they think, well, that's what human nature and history has been about the entire time. But the facts say otherwise. That's a little sidelight I wanted to mention. But you know, these ziggurat-type objects are elsewhere. This is from Chichen Itza in South America, the Mayan civilization that flourished over 1,000 years ago, and they built these pyramids as well. Now, take a look at that top photo on the left and the bottom photo on the left. The one on the top is in ruins, the second one is pretty good shape, actually. And to me, they look a lot alike, don't they? One's in the Middle East, one's in Central America. So we find these kind of structures all over the world, and I think it's looking back to what was great about Babel all that time. And where was it? Well, this is a plot of the Sumerian population, and they're saying that Babylon, or Middle Eastern civilization, here's the Persian Gulf. This is modern-day Iraq, and Iraq would be over here, and we have different places here. Babylon is one place that's mentioned right there, and Babel, Tower of Babel may have been there or very close by. And here is Ur, way down here. You can see it's inland. It once was on the sea, we believe the Persian Gulf, but not anymore. And some of the other cities are important cities of various cultures in the past. Well, so they build this city. They're building the tower. There's indications that the tower wasn't finished, but they were well on their way. And so what's God's response? Their response to God's command was that we will defiantly stay here and remain together despite what you tell us. So it says there in Genesis 11:5, God came down to see the city. And again, I talked to you before about the garden, how that when the fall happened, God came down, he walked in the garden in the cool of the day. It's not like God is a man, he has a body or something, but yet he can describe this in a way that makes sense to us. God does come down and check on what's going on here. And he noted that, he said, the people there have a common language. Already God is developing a plan to deal with the situation. In order to build this thing, it called for a tremendous amount of cooperation, a tremendous amount of working together. And if you have a common language, that's a lot easier to do. But if you don't have a common language, that makes it very difficult to do. Could you imagine my giving this talk to you today if none of you spoke English and I didn't speak the languages you spoke? I could spend an hour up here talking. I don't think you'd really understand much, would you? And working together would be tough. You can't cooperate with people if that's the case. And he also says there that God, not only did he see the city, he noted they had a common language, but he concluded that the people would do all that they desired. It says there's nothing that they want to do they cannot do. And their desire was to stay put, and their desire was to defy God, and he'd already gone through that with the flood. There they probably did disperse, but they defied God, and it says they were thinking of evil continually, and violence filled the earth. And so God had enough of that already, and he didn't want to destroy the world all over again. So he was going to cut this off when it needed to be. So what he did is he came down and he confused their languages. And the indication was it was instantaneous. Two people were talking, and all of a sudden, what are you saying? I just can't understand. It's a miraculous sort of thing. And the person who was talking thought he was making perfect sense, and the person who was listening, it was gibberish. Why can't you speak right? What are you talking about? It doesn't make any sense. And this really fouled things up as far as their confusion of languages are concerned. So very quickly, the building of the tower had to cease and not continue at this point. It frustrated any attempt to continue to cooperate and make this happen. What was the result? Well, it says explicitly, because of their differences in language, the people scattered. And by the way, the people probably associated one another with families. We all do this. I've talked to one of the pastors here, and he was showing me pictures of his family, his wife, and his children, and his brother. We often will associate with people we're related to. And then you may associate with people that you have some kinship with. You go to church together, or perhaps you live in the same neighborhood. You associate with people around you. Many times it's an extended family. And then there's maybe a city, and then a state, a nation, a group of people, a tribe perhaps. You associate with people you have something in common with. There's an indication that God, when he confused their languages, did it within families. I don't think a guy came home from work after he decided he couldn't work with those people anymore. He went home and found his wife couldn't communicate with him either. I mean, we already have trouble communicating with our wives bad enough as it is, right? The last thing we need is a different language. So probably within families, even within small clans, people spoke the same language at that point. But they realized that staying there was not going to work out anymore, because you couldn't carry on communication, you couldn't have commerce, you couldn't swap things, you couldn't trade agricultural products for other things. So people were kind of forced at that point to go off and do their own thing. And of course, once they're scattered, the construction of the tower is over. It's sitting there. The people remained behind, probably would like to have continued building, but they didn't have the manpower anymore to do that. So the tower probably sat there in disrepair for a very long time. And so it says that the place was called Babel, and that comes from a Hebrew word which means confusion. It means confusion. And even today, we use the word Babel or Babel, some people say, for this whole idea of confusion. And so Babylon, again, is much the same thing. You know, in the book of Revelation, it talks about this Babylon. There had been a Babylonian empire twice in the world. One of them hauled off, they destroyed the temple in the 6th century BC and hauled the remaining people in Judah back into captivity. And the Apostle John, there writing the book of Revelation, used Babylon to describe a world system. Some people think that Babylon indeed will be rebuilt, and there'll be like a third Babylonian empire. Other people think it's a type. It's not going to literally be Babylon, but it will be like Babylon. It doesn't matter to me. Babylon's a bad thing, all the way around, no matter the way you look at it. And who was the leader at this time? Well, there's a clue given in Genesis 10, verses 7 through 10. We have the lineage there given of Ham, who then one of his sons is named Cush, and then one of his sons is named Nimrod. And so he's a grandson of Ham, and he's a great-grandson of Noah. And it says that Nimrod was a mighty hunter before the Lord. There is a constellation called Orion. I see it in the morning when I get up and look towards the east. It's rising. It's a very distinctive constellation. You can see it throughout the world. And Orion is a hunter. And in some cultures, they actually make the connection to Nimrod because this hunter, because he's a mighty hunter. I suspect that may be medieval in origin, but I don't know for sure, but I think it fits. And I'm not sure what a mighty hunter before the Lord refers to. Some people would say, well, just a hunter who's very good at hunting game. But some people think, and this is again speculation because that's all we have from Scripture, but they think he might have been a hunter of men, either personally hunting men for sport, like you would an animal, or perhaps he was hunting up men collectively with troops or whatever he had. But he's generally viewed as being a very bad man. He is viewed as being a leader and being a dictatorial leader at that. So Nimrod typically is not the kind of person you'd want to emulate. And it says there in that passage that the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, mentions it by name even before the Tower of Babel is really mentioned in chapter 11. Erech, Akkad, which we think the Akkadians come from. Interesting, the Akkadians spoke a Semitic language, but it looks like they were descendants of Ham, so at least ethnically they were Hamites, but they adopted a Semitic language eventually. That happens to a lot of people, by the way. And then Calna. These are 4 cities that are mentioned, some of which we think they can identify in the Middle East today. The whole conclusion is, it says there, that they're all in the land of Shinar. And this kind of places him there at the time, at the place being good. So many people think, since it's Shinar is mentioned there, and Babel is explicitly mentioned, that perhaps Nimrod was the leader who kind of organized all of this. And again, the Bible doesn't clearly state that, but picking up clues here, that seems to be a pretty good inference. And almost everybody agrees that Nimrod likely was the leader who oversaw the project. Another name that comes up is Peleg. It's found in verse 25 of chapter 10. And you find here that Shem is the father of Arphaxad, who is the father of Shelah, who is the father of Eber, who then was the father of Peleg. So that makes what? Peleg the, let's see, I'll count this out, great-grandson of Shem and the great-great-great-grandson of Noah. Okay, so a descendant coming through a different lineage. And depending on how many people there were, they may have known each other, Nimrod and Peleg, and of course a lot of these people, they overlap. But what's interesting is that the name Peleg in Hebrew means divided. It means divided. And because it also says that he was named divided, or Peleg, because in his day the earth was divided. The Eretz was Peleg, it says. And so there are many people, this goes way back, they generally believe that this refers to the division of languages, that in the lineage of Shem, and Nimrod may have been the leader, being a Hamite, but under the lineage of Shem, the division took place. Now, that's not a universally held position. There are some other alternatives. People have tried to explore what it means, but the general consensus has been for at least about 400 years, the time of James Ussher, and probably long before that, was that this refers to the division of languages at that time. Whether Peleg was named that when he was born, or eventually his name was changed. For instance, in the New Testament, Simon became Peter. Jesus renamed him. And so it could be that Peleg was renamed, or it could be that there was a wordplay there and also a kind of a prophecy that this is what's going to happen in his lifetime. Well, the second part of chapter 11 gives the lineage of Shem and on down to Abraham. And I want to go through this with you. You can see that Shem, I've already mentioned the first 5 here. Shem is the father of Arphaxad, who's the father of Shelah, who's the father of Eber, who's the father of Peleg. And of course, we just saw that. Shem, Arphaxad, Shelah, Eber, Peleg. So the reason why it's mentioned here, I think, Nimrod may have been the political leader at the time of the Tower of Babel, but Peleg was the person around in the lineage of Abraham at the time of this. And you'll find that there's always a concern to trace the lineage down. You can trace it from Adam to Noah, from Noah through Shem down to Abraham, and of course Abraham on down to David, and from David on down to Jesus. That lineage all the way through. We know the lineage there. So you come down Shem, Arphaxad, Shelah, Eber, Peleg, then Ru after that, then Serug, then Nahor, and then Terah. And Terah was the father of Abraham, and I had to skip over to Genesis 25:7 when he gives the death of Abraham. It says he was 175 years old when he died. He was 90 years old, past 90 when his chosen son was born. We thought of him as being an old man then, but he lived almost twice as long. And one of the talks I've already mentioned that later on, after Sarah died, he married another woman named Keturah. And so he had a bunch more children. By the way, something interesting about me. Where did anybody know when he moved to the Promised Land where he lived for the most part? Anybody know where Abraham lived? He lived at a place called Hebron. Today I would call it Hebron. The reason why I would say Hebron is because I live in Hebron, Kentucky, a town called Hebron. Now, what's interesting is after we moved there a couple years ago, my wife asked me, well, we ought to think about burial plots. We're not getting any younger. And she suggested that we look for a burial plot up in the hills of Kentucky, where my family is from. It's about a 2-hour drive away. And my parents are buried there. And she suggested we look into burial plot there. And the name of the cemetery there is called Machpelah. You know what Machpelah is? It's the place where, when Sarah died, Abraham bought a parcel of land from a Hittite to bury his wife. And he, in turn, was buried there, and his son, his grandson, his great-grandson were all buried at Machpelah. So, like Abraham, I'm living in Hebron, and I hope to be buried in Machpelah. It's not very often you get a chance to do something biblical like Abraham, so I'm looking forward to, well, I'm not looking forward to dying, but I am looking forward, when I do, to be buried with my father. Not my father's my father. My grandfathers are buried somewhere else nearby, but with my father there in Machpelah. Wouldn't that be cool? Now, I've listed here the ages of each of these 10 men, but notice also it's 10 generations from Shem to Abraham. There's 10 generations from Adam to Noah. There's a lot of this going on. There's also nice generations like 17 and so forth from going through the lineage of Jesus. But what do you notice about the ages? Take a look at those. What do you see? Do you notice the trend?
No, it's decreasing.
Yeah, notice that Shem was living 600, and that seems like an awful long time, but some of the patriarchs were living 800 and 900 years. Adam lived to be 961 or 63, as I recall, and Methuselah lived to be 969. People say he was the oldest person ever lived, but he's simply the oldest recorded person. There may have been somebody older than that, we just don't know. But typically, unless they were translated away like Enoch or murdered like Abel, people lived anywhere from 700, 800, 900 years. That's pretty common back then. Could you imagine living that long? I'm 60. I'd just be a youngster at this point, the way that would work out. That's kind of cool. I'd like that. I look forward to another 800 years. I could get on with that. But then Shem comes along, 600, that's a little low. Then Arphaxad, only 438. Then Shelah, 433. Eber, a little longer, 464. They're not making 500 anymore, are they? And then they drop down to 200 something. Ru and Peleg, 239, 230. And then Nahor, 148. Terah, 205. And Abraham, 175. It indicates at that point that Abraham was pretty old when he was 90. So before the flood, people lived a long time. After the flood, they don't live quite so long, and they drop down and down and down to the point that eventually Moses wrote 70 years is typical. And maybe you'll get a few more than that, maybe a few less, but that's a typical lifespan, he said. And if you stay healthy, that is, even today, a typical lifespan. Now, why is that? Well, I'll give you two reasons. Number one, kind of a physical reason. We believe that Adam and Eve were exquisite physical specimens. They were in very good health. Their bodies, their minds, everything was working very well. I already mentioned their sexual inclinations and their urges, probably stronger than mine and yours, because they were very healthy, very virile people. But with time, we've got the curse acting here. It's wear and tear time. Things are wearing out more. And we have what are called mutations that take place. The environment produces these. And each generation probably are not quite as physically and mentally fit as the previous generations were. Yeah, you thought your kids were pretty bad. There's got a reason to think that now, don't you? It's just the way that things are going. But why is that happening? Could the Lord reverse that? He could. But could you imagine leaving man in a fallen state forever? I mean, God could, I guess, ordain that once man transgressed, he could live forever, but then there would be no hope for redemption. He couldn't get back to where it was supposed to be because his body now is the residence of that sinful nature, it seems like. And then during the time before the flood, people lived for a very long time, and you saw what happened. The world was filled with evil and violence. This violence continued. It's a horrible place, apparently, a very bad place. And I think part of that is the fact that people live so long. If you live to 600 years old, think of all the wickedness that you could do. Think of all the ways that you could go astray. Sometimes people will follow the Lord and do what's right for 30, 40 years, and by the time they're 60, they may have strayed off the path. If you live to be 600, 700 years old, almost everybody has more than ample opportunity to stray off the path. So I do believe part of the reason why God has lowered our lifespans is because it helps restrain evil. You know, if you have a bad leader, he can only be a bad leader for a few decades. Eventually he gets to be 80 or 90 and he dies. But what if you got a bad leader when he was 70 and he lives for the next 600 years? That'd be really, really bad, wouldn't it? So it does restrain evil is a large part of that. And there's some Old Testament promises to them that at least that long life would be one of those things that they would have from honoring God and doing what he asked them to do. Well, this then takes us to Abraham. And from that, we then get the Abraham giving birth to the father of Isaac, and then to Jacob, and so forth, leading on out to the lineage of Christ. And what we've tried to get across during the seminar is all the important elements and doctrines that go back to the creation. Now, back to Genesis, and when we talk about this kind of question, one question that inevitably comes up is, where did the races come from? Where do the races come from? And oftentimes when people ask about races, what are they talking about? They're talking about skin color. Let's just be blunt about it. I look out, I see a lot of very dark-skinned people. Look at me, I'm not nearly as dark. So people would ask, I come from a group of people that are pretty light-skinned. My ancestors come from very northern Europe, the British Isles. And your ancestors come from somewhere in Africa for a very long time. And so why is it that I look so different from you and you look so different from me? Why is that? And people have kind of divided up this sort of stuff. And I grew up kind of learning this. They kind of argued when I was growing up that there were three races. Three races. This is pretty simple. They say there were black people and there were yellow people, now we'd say Asian people, and then there were white people. All right? At least that's the way Europeans kind of divided this up in the past. And it seems so nice and neat and tidy. And they look at Scripture, they see three different sons of Noah. And Ham kind of goes south and west towards Africa. That's where you find a lot of dark people. So Ham must have been the ancestor of all the black people. And Shem kind of headed east, and so they're a little darker, but not quite as dark, but they're not as dark as lighter-skinned people. So that must be, they came from Shem. And then people who moved north and west, they're lighter color, that's Japheth. And so consequently, white people must have come from Japheth, Asians from Shem, and black people from Ham. That's the way a lot of people looked at it. When I was growing up, that's what I was told. A lot of problems. For instance, if you go to Australia, they have very dark Aborigines there. Yeah, I think a person like me would easily confuse them for being African, and probably you folks would. You'd look at them and say, they don't look anything like us. All right? But they look dark to me. What about India? A lot of those people there look kind of dark. So it's kind of too simplistic to look at this. In fact, nobody really claims where Far Eastern people come from, the Japanese and Korean and so forth. So are they really Shemites is a big question. So this thing is all kind of simplistic. I'll put in question marks there, but I want to let you know that I don't really buy this anymore. I was taught this growing up. I want to ask two questions. One question I want to ask is it biblical? Is this something the Bible really teaches, or is it something that's even consistent with what the Bible teaches? And second of all, is it factual? All right, when I mean factual, it may not be necessarily contrary to Scripture, but on the other hand, does it really make sense? I've already thrown a couple things out to you. that Australian Aborigines kind of defy explanation at this point. So let's delve into this just a little bit and take a look at this. First of all, where did the idea of races come from? It's shockingly enough, at least from the European perspective, it's pretty recent. Apparently 500 years ago, they weren't talking about races too much in Europe. Even 300 years ago, not so much. It's a more modern concept that came about here. They would talk about nations. Even within Europe, you have people who obviously are different. My ancestry is actually Scot, as a northern part of Great Britain. And they started fighting with the English 1,000 years ago. They've fought for centuries. And you look at them and say, you look the same, you talk the same. Well, they talk very different, but they've got different cultures. And they fought each other a long time. They didn't think of themselves as being different races. They just thought of them as being different nations. And the people across the channel, they were different nations, but they weren't different races. It was more modern that people get thinking of races. And one person who plays a role in this, he didn't start it. He didn't start it, but he did play a role in this, George Darwin. You've heard of him, haven't you? Right? Oh, wait a minute. I always get George and Charles confused. My bad. Let me fix this right now. It's going to bug me. Charles Darwin's the one I mean, and why I get confused is that Charles had a son named George, and George was an astronomer. So let me fix this right away. I always do that. Anybody ever heard of George Darwin before? Probably not one person has, okay? Most people. But you have heard of Charles, haven't you? All right? Everyone's heard of Charles Darwin. Okay. What did Charles Darwin do? Well, he wrote a book called On the Origin of Species, published in 1859. It was 150 years ago. Now, many people mistakenly think that Darwin invented the idea of evolution. He didn't. In fact, his grandfather, Erasmus, 50 years earlier, published his own theory of evolution. So the idea of evolution was around for quite a while. In fact, the ancient Greeks, more than 2,000 years ago, were evolutionists. They believed in evolution. So this idea of evolution is being kicked around quite a bit, particularly in the late 18th, early 19th century. What Darwin did, Charles Darwin did, is he published up what most people consider the most likely theory today of how evolution occurred. It was descent with modification with descent, that is, changing in characteristics through genetics and so forth. And again, this idea of evolution had been around at least 100 years prior to Darwin, but he codified it in people. His writings really influenced a lot of people. So while he did not start the idea of races, the publication of his book played a very key role in propagating and promulgating this idea of races. I want to make it very clear. He didn't start the idea, been around for a while before he came along, but I'm convinced the idea of races actually comes from evolutionary thinking. The idea is this: we had some ancestors, be they from Adam and Eve, or be they from just some apes that evolved in the millions of years ago. And they had children, and they had children. There's modification through descent. You had different groups developing. They developed different features of height and weight, and shapes of eyes and ears and nose and lips, and even skin color gets changed. And groups of people go with groups of people, and some groups kind of evolve lighter skin. They go farther north. They don't need the melanin that people in the tropics need, so people in the tropics maintain the melanin. We lost a lot of it, and that's where races came from. So if we were to relate us into the past, then our common ancestors would go way, 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 way back. If you believe in evolution, then a person from Africa and a person from Northern Europe would maybe have shared an ancestor 50,000 years ago, maybe 100,000 years ago. So how closely related are we? Not very close at all, are we? On the other hand, if you believe in biblical creation, our most common ancestor might go back maybe 4,000 years, maybe 4,500 years, but no farther than that. Now again, that's a pretty distant relationship, but we're a lot closer related if our ancestors go back 4,000 years than if they go back 100,000 years, right? Furthermore, these people were believing in evolution, and they were believing that some groups of people were evolving faster than other groups of people, and some groups of people weren't evolving quite as fast. And if time went on long enough, then one group of people, one race as it were, would become a distinct species of creatures, And the other group will become a distinct species of creatures so that you can't intermingle or marry anymore, can't have children anymore. You see how that's working? That means we're fundamentally different. And evolutionists then, at least at the time of Darwin, would look at people sitting here in front of me and say, you're fundamentally different from this man standing up here. Now, a creationist is going to say, no, you're not fundamentally different. You're not any different than I am. We're just a few cosmetic differences, pretty superficial, but inside, we're all the same, aren't we? Well, there's a subtitle on the origin of species. Generally, people just say on the origin of species, or just origin of species. But it had this, it said, added to it. It was actually the title, the full title was On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. That refers to the mechanism that he was talking about of how evolution supposedly occurred. But then it had a subtitle. Back then, titles had tended to be really long. And then they put a subtitle underneath, and it starts with an or. So either the title is On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or the preservation of favored races in the struggle for life. The preservation of favored races in the struggle for life. Now, what he meant by races in the broadest sense was different races of horses, and different races of dogs, and different races of birds of various types. But the only difference between different species of animals is they've had enough time to evolve into different groups, and the expectation was that different races of people, be there 3 or whatever, is that they eventually would evolve and become distinct species of creatures. About 20 years later, well, maybe a dozen years later, Darwin again turned and wrote another book, and this time he concentrated on a man, and he called this book The Descent of Man and Selection in Relation to Sex. He was trying to explain differences between men and women and cultures and so forth. But in this, he was making the example of races of men, and this had a huge impact upon thinking. The British Empire was greatly, well, I should say Britain, and hence the British Empire, was greatly influenced by Darwinian thinking. Because, and this happened in Germany, the Germans really grabbed hold of this, because at that time, in the latter part of the 19th century, what was the most advanced part of the world? It was Europe. It was Europe. And so what many Europeans decided was that because of their great advances, that proved that Europeans were the most evolved people. Do you see where this is going? Okay. If Europeans are one race of white people and they're the most evolved, and by the way, the Germans and the British were the most evolved of the Europeans because they had the most advanced society of all, the highest standard of living, the most advanced. They were more advanced than the Slavs were, more advanced than the Southern Europeans and so forth. So they were the most advanced of the advanced. But Europeans in general were very advanced, and other parts of the world, Asians and Africans, they weren't as advanced, i.e. they were not as evolved. Crudely put, Europeans were more human, and Africans were less human. Kind of grates hearing that, doesn't it? It's such a horrible thing to contemplate, but people seriously believe this 150 years ago, 120 years ago, even 100 years ago they believed this. And it had huge consequences, the effects of thinking upon people. It led to what's called social Darwinism. These were people who wanted to take Darwinian ideas and apply it to society because they wanted to evolve society. Suppose you had groups of people in your midst who were not quite as evolved as everybody else. Well, they're kind of dead weight, aren't they? They're kind of weighing down human evolution. In fact, they're stopping, they're retarding the advancement of humanity. And we breed cattle, and we breed chickens. We breed them for certain characteristics, and sometimes you end up with a group of animals that just really aren't worth much. And so, what do you do with them? You get rid of them. You don't breed them. You get the most desirable traits. And that's how you get very nice cattle that are very big, give a lot of meat, but they give a lot of milk or whatever. But you also breed plants the same way. You grow a lot of maize around here. What do you want? You want really tall maize plants with lots of ears on it, don't you? Would you settle for small maize plants with little ears? No. And you realize the native maize, it all came from America, The original maize was pretty short and squat, didn't have a whole lot of ears on it, but over the years they've genetically modified these by just breeding them a certain way to produce large plants with large ears, plenty of kernels on the thing. Well, why not do that with people? That was the idea. And so they identified groups of people in their midst that they thought really ought not to be breeding so much. And this led to racism. You know, if I think my race is better than your race, then I'm going to proudly proclaim that I'm better than you, and you better listen to what I say, and you better follow what's going on. It led to a thing called eugenics. This movement hit the United States around 1910, 1920, and it was really big. They decided there were certain people that weren't that good, and so they sought to discourage them from having children. They oftentimes would sterilize the women. They would do it against their will when they did that. And who were the people that were doing that to in the United States? You want to make a guess? Black people, ancestors originally from Africa. I spent much of my life in the Deep South, and many of those states had eugenics laws. Some of those were on the books until about 40 years ago. And there were some women who were sterilized as young women. They were like 16 or 17. A woman, she became pregnant, a young girl actually, unmarried, and she went in for help, and they delivered the baby for her, and while she was there, they sterilized her. And they never told a lot of these women. Later on, they wondered, why can't I have children? It wasn't until some of them just found out a few years ago, after 40, 50 years, 60 years, they were sterilized when they were 16 and never knew it. This is part of the eugenics laws that they had. They incarcerated people. All horrible things happened. Why? Because they were convinced these people weren't as evolved as we were. And so we need to prevent them from breeding. They had similar attitudes towards people from Eastern Europe, from Southern Europe, and also in Europe as well. They did that. And one of the groups of people that came into it at that time were the Jews. And that led to problems. Well, British colonialism, I don't want to be, I'm not a Brit, so I don't think I should be criticizing it too much here. But, you know, the British Empire was vast. It started up really in the 17th, 18th century. I think it was at its high water mark in the late 18th century. And at that time, they were going around to find resources and exploit those. But they also had, at least part of their message was to help the locals. And they were trying to bring Christianity to people. And, you know, I understand that there are many professing Christians in Zambia. It's largely a Christian nation, I've been led to believe. And I think part of that came about through the British influence, did it not? I may be wrong about that. So there was one good thing about British colonialism. When did the British arrive here in Zambia? I have no idea. When was it? Sometime in the 19th century. Anybody know the date?
Was Livingston, yeah? Livingston.
Pardon?
Livingston would have been, yeah. David Livingston.
Okay, it would be 1850s, 1860s, and then the British came in and took over shortly thereafter there. Well, at that point, British society had not been eaten up by Darwinism yet, but by 1890 it had been, just a few decades later. And at that point, the British arrived in Tasmania, that's an island south of Australia, and they colonized it, and there were some very primitive, dark-skinned people living, the native Tasmans. And they were very primitive people, and because it was so late, the British settlers there, they don't talk about this much, but the British settlers were convinced that these natives really weren't human, because look at them, they hadn't evolved, we have. And so much to the point that some of the colonists, the settlers there, would go off on a Saturday and hunt. Like you would go sport hunting to kill a lion or something, you would kill a man. I mean, that's shocking, but they did this. It's something that the British didn't do in 1850, but by 1890 and 1900 they were doing. They only did it for a few years, and they finally woke up and realized this isn't too good. But that's the fruit of this, and I think Zambia had the good fortune and the grace of God to be settled a little before that happened. But they left the remnant there, and some of the racism that you may have, I don't know how much it's been here, but you've had in other parts of Africa, came from this idea of this. I mentioned the Jews, the Nazis in Germany attempted to exterminate millions of them. They also tried to exterminate the Gypsies and a number of other groups of people that they thought, Hitler thought that the Gypsies and the Jews were just vermin. They were not really human, and so they were worthy of extermination. And that's the basis of that. And it's what's it based on? The belief in evolution. However, It really makes me sad here. Many Christians actually went along with this. I mentioned the eugenics laws that were passed in the southern states of the United States. That's considered what we call the Bible Belt in the United States. There were a lot of, the church is very strong there, strongest part of the country. It's the last part of our country that was swept by a revival. And yet, they let their bigotry guide their Christianity rather than the other way around. If they had true Christian principles, they would have said, no, this is wrong. But they let their bigotry and their fear and other things come in the way. And it's very sad that Christians so many times go along with what the world tells them rather than looking to the Word of God and telling the world what is right. And that's just a sad chapter, I think, in modern church. In the last 200 years, the modern church has had some real problems in that front. That's the bad news. My whole point is that Darwinism, when you apply it to humanity, is really bad. Their belief is, again, that people evolved and that the different races were just different groups of people isolated from one another, and they're continually evolving apart and apart and apart. And if time goes on long enough, evolution goes on long enough, then they won't be the same species anymore. We'll have 2 or 3 or more species of humans, if you will. But if some are more evolved than others, then perhaps it's a good thing that you get rid of the ones that are not as evolved. And people have actually, in the last century, have tried to make that come about. What's the good news? Well, I got a photo here. Study the photograph carefully. Would you ever believe that they are twins from the same mother and the same father? They are. And there are other examples. This is just like from about 10 years ago. A couple gave birth to this. Now look at this, I'm stunned. That's not what I experienced. Now what happened is the parents both had a mixture of genetics for producing skin color. I think both of them were kind of neutral color. They were darker than me, but lighter than many of you in the audience. They were somewhere in between. And out of that in between, they produced one extreme to the other. And I'm flabbergasted. I've seen several different photos of twins born to a couple, same mother obviously, but also the same father. They can do blood tests and other things to prove that it's the same father. It's shocking when you first see this. It still is after I've seen these pictures again and again, several examples of these. What is going on? Well, it turns out our makeup of our bodies are controlled by what we call genetics, and we have genes that are there. And this is not going to be a class on genetics. It's not going to be doing Punnett squares and all this stuff. You may have seen some of this in school. If you haven't, don't worry about it. It's not important. But skin color is really superficial. It's just skin deep. You know, you open us up inside, and we're not terribly different, are we? So the skin color goes anywhere from being very dark to being very light. And it's really controlled by 2 sets of genes, or 2 alleles there. And you'll see there some letters, little letter A, little letter B, big letter A, and big letter B. You all see those. And everybody's got a pair of those. Okay, you're going to have 2 letters of A and 2 letters of B. And they're showing there maybe Adam and Eve had a mixture of those. A capital A, a lowercase a capital B, and a lowercase b. You see that? Now, if you have a capital of either one of those, A and B, that tends to make your skin very dark. It's a dominant gene, and it makes your skin very dark. On the other hand, if you only have one of those capital letters, then it tends to make your skin, the lower letter will express itself, and it makes your skin color lighter. And so they're thinking that Adam and Eve both had a capital A and a little a, and a capital B and a little b, and when you shuffle the genes, what happens during reproduction, you have different possibilities. The fellow at the top there with the blonde hair and the white skin, he has little a, little a, little b, little b. He doesn't have any of the genes for dark skin color, and so consequently, his skin and hair color are very light. I'm similar to that person, all right? The next person's a little darker. His features, eyes, hair, and skin are a little darker, because you can see there, he has 2 small a's, but he has a big B and a small b. The next one has double big A and big B and small b, and the last guy has double A, double E, both in caps. If you have parents that are mixtures, we call them heterozygous in these features, Their skin color will be neutral, it won't be real dark, it won't be real light, but they have the capability of having very light-skinned children and very dark-skinned children. That's obviously what happened here. Both of the parents were heterozygous. One of the children, one on the right, is homozygous, we would say, because it just has she has the lighter skin colors, and the one on the left is homozygous in the darker skin colors. Just simple genetics doing that. And so you could shuffle these around, and as you shuffle them around within groups of people, particularly after dispersion of the languages and the people, they would have been within family groups, and you would have had groups of families would have had a lot more melanin. They would have had the capital A's and capital B's, and some people had fewer ones. And the ones that had a lot of melanin, they ended up in more tropical areas, and people who didn't ended up in higher latitudes. I didn't mention this explicitly, but the whole point of melanin is to give you protection from the sun. The darker your skin, the more that you darken up, protection from the sun. Do you all ever get sunburned? You ever get sunburned? Not easily, right? If you go out in the middle of the day in the summer, when the sun's high overhead, you're in the tropics, and the sun's over the head a couple of times a year. You probably could get burned if you stay out there for a long time, but you will get a little darker, won't you? Your body has the ability to produce more melanin. You've got a certain amount of melanin produced all the time. Well, if I went out in the noonday sun when the sun's high overhead, I would get a nasty burn in a matter of minutes. If I exposed myself gradually, I would darken up and my skin would get a little darker. It's summer back home, so I've darkened up, and so you can see my arm that gets exposed. It's darkened up a bit, but up here it's pretty light, isn't it? This is about as dark as I can get. I can't get any darker. If I tried, I'd end up getting burned on that front. So God made this provision. He realized people weren't going to be living in all the same places. So people who live when the sun's high overhead, as you heard, it's quite an advantage. But it's no advantage at all living very far north. And so my forebears had light skin and light eyes, and that's why I'm like this. Am I better than you? No, I'm just different from you. That's all there is to it. It's just simple genetics. And the neat thing is that we can explain this. People say, well, you can't explain the races biblically. They say, oh yeah, we can. All you have to do is have Adam and Eve, and maybe then you have the bottleneck when you get to Noah. When you get to Noah, he has 3 sons and 3 daughters, and we don't know anything about the daughters. The sons will resemble to some extent Noah and his wife, but they won't be identical because you'll get various shades in between. But our belief is that through all the shuffling that took place, at the time of the family of 8 people on the ark, there were probably a wide range of skin colors and other features, eye shape and nose and so forth. And then when people began to marry and reproduce after the flood, people kind of grouped off into little groups, and certain characteristics were found within a group, and certain characteristics were not found in that group, found in other groups. So all it is just a superficial shuffling of the genetic code. And there's absolutely, first of all, there's no scientific basis for racism. I asked the question about this before, what about the races? And I asked, is it factual? Is it biblical? Number 1, it's not factual. There's no scientific basis for it. And number 2, there's no biblical basis for it. Let me give you the biblical case here. Acts 17:26, it says, this is from the sermon at Mars Hill, where Paul is preaching. He says, he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on the earth, having determined their appointed times and boundaries of their habitation. So he's saying that God made every man on earth. He made them from one man. Who was that one man? Adam. He went back to the garden too, didn't went back to Genesis on this. He said every person alive, God made every nation. And in his sovereignty, God has appointed certain times and certain places that people will be there. The British Empire had its day, it's had its appointed time and its habitation. It's kind of withered away. The United States is having its day of the sun. It's about to wither away and be taken place by somebody else. But within nations, you have borders, you have groups of people, and God has appointed to determine those things. All from one man. Now, he was talking here at Mars Hill to the Greeks. And the Greeks were bigots. They were racist. Do you know why? They had 2 races. You know what they had? They had the Greeks and everybody else. And you know what they called everybody else? They called them barbarians. You were either Greek, you were cultured and civilized, or you were not Greek. You were just barbarians and uncivilized. And so when Paul starts talking to him and says, all nations on earth came from one man, God made all nations from one man, that bothered them. They didn't like hearing that because they thought they were better than everybody else. So the conclusion is, there is only one race. There is only one race. It's Adam's race. We all come from one blood. We're all part of one race. And so the good news is there's absolutely no biblical basis for racism. In fact, the term race doesn't make any sense. I've tried to take that out of my vocabulary. They're just people of different nations and tongues and skin tones and other features, and that's it. But we're all the same inside. When I say inside, I'm talking about our heart now. We're all fallen creatures. We're all created in the image of God. I look at people that I don't understand at all. They look very different from me, but I reflect on the fact that they are made in God's image and likeness just as much as I am. And if they don't know the Lord, they're just as lost as I once was. And we can't allow our bigotry and our hatred for other people to get in the way. We've got a dying world out there. And our job as Christians is to share with them the gospel and show them the way through the Lord Jesus Christ and His atonement for us, with the sacrifice on the cross and His resurrection from the dead, for repentance of our sins and forgiveness of our sins. And if you come away with just one thing here, anything in church, anything we've done here this week, that's the centrality, that's the important thing. And Genesis, we think, will help you understand that and share that with the parishioners and others better. Well, thank you very much.